Hi, I'm John Hornick. Welcome to Lesson 10 of Chef's Apprentice, Learning to Cook Like a Pro, one small plate at a time. This lesson is oysters en cocotte. This is my variation of the famous dish invented at Antoine's restaurant in New Orleans called Oysters Rockefeller. Traditionally, Oysters Rock is served as 4 to 6 oysters, roasted or grilled in the half shell, with various topping ingredients. Some of Antoine's recipe is still a secret. My version uses well-known traditional ingredients, and it's more like a stew, so it's great on cold winter nights. You will start working with oysters and potatoes, and to cook spinach until it's just wilted, which means that it's still bright green and has just lost its leafy form. Serving this dish in a cocotte with a golden baked parmesan crust makes a great presentation. Techniques today are shucking and working with oysters, chopping, peeling, dicing, and boiling potatoes, partially cooking bacon, grating cheese, seasoning, wilting spinach, and adjusting seasoning. So let's start cooking. Okay, so here we are at the board. I've gotten some requests to have more FaceTime, so we're going to try something different today in terms of presenting the mise en place. So for this preparation, we're obviously going to need some oysters. Now, there's many different types of oysters out there. After you get your oysters, you should keep them on ice, meaning on ice cubes. But we're going to use these right now, so I don't have them on the ice. If I were going to keep them in the fridge for a period of time, I would put them over ice. Now, there are many different types of oysters out there. For this preparation, you want to have oysters that are relatively large, plump oysters. We don't really want the small ones. These are blue point oysters. You can't really tell from looking at them what variety they are, but these are blue points. And I'm going to rinse these oysters off before we shuck them. We're going to shuck a couple of oysters for this presentation, but you don't have to use shucked oysters. You could use oysters that have already been shucked, freshly shucked, that is. You can get freshly shucked oysters at Whole Foods and a variety of other places. But because this is a course on learning to cook like a pro, you need to know how to shuck an oyster. So we're going to do that today. We're also going to need a shallot, and we're also going to need potatoes. Now, these are yellow potatoes. There are many, I think there's 400 different types of potatoes out there. And what you want is a potato that is dense and hard. Now, you might not really be able to tell the difference with that, but if you have a more of a waxy skin on it, it's probably the kind of potato that you want. You do not want a russet potato. Russet potatoes are the ones that you bake, right? They have more of a leathery skin on them, and they absorb water a lot more, so you'll wind up with a pastier potato if you were to use russet potatoes. So it's best to use a potato like a yellow potato or a white potato. Let's see, what else? Spinach. We're going to need some fresh spinach. I prefer to use baby spinach. This is the Whole Foods 365 brand. It's been triple washed, but you can use adult spinach, and that doesn't have to be baby spinach. But I'm going to use the baby spinach. We'll also need to have some bacon. And I often cut my bacon in half like this. It makes it easier to handle in the pan. And we're only going to need 1 or 2 strips, but I have a little bit extra here. We're also going to need Pernod. Pernod is a anise or anise, depending on your pronunciation. Anise flavored and scented liqueur, sweet. It's pretty powerful. You don't need a whole lot of it, but we do need to have Pernod. We'll also need some parsley. And we're going to need Parmesan cheese. Now, I have a hunk of Parmesan cheese here, and we are going to grate it for this preparation. Now, you can buy it pre-grated, freshly grated, so you don't have to grate it, but again, we're learning techniques here, so we're going to grate this cheese. And of course, we will need our kosher salt. This is Morton's kosher salt. We'll need our pepper mill, and we will need some butter, which I call insalted butter because my spell correct on my phone changed unsalted to insalted. We want it to be room temperature. We don't need much of it. We're going to need about 1 to 2 tablespoons just to butter the cocottes. And then we're going to need also some olive oil. So that, I believe, is our mise en place. Yes, okay, so we are going to break and reset, and we're going to come back and do the equipment. Okay, we're back at the board to talk about the equipment that we'll need for this presentation. Of course, we're going to need a cutting board, as we almost always do. We'll need to have our chef's knife, and we will also need to have an oyster knife. Now, oyster knives have or oyster knives, I should say, have a kind of a slightly pointed end. They're usually about this long, 4 inches long. And so you'll need an oyster knife. It's very difficult to open an oyster unless you have the proper tool. We'll also need to have a salad spinner. Now, I said that the spinach that I'm going to use has been triple washed, but I still wash it anyway because of all the things we hear about in the news about recalls, bacteria, and E. coli, and that kind of stuff. So we'll need a salad spinner. We'll also need to have a peeler to peel the potatoes. I use OXO. These are great peelers. And we'll also need some brown paper. Now, the brown paper is going to be used after we par cook the bacon to absorb the grease and to drain. And some people use paper towels, but if you use paper towels and you're trying to get something crispy, the paper towel can, when it gets hot from the whatever you put on it that's been fried, it can create steam. So that causes some of your crispiness to go away. So use brown paper, crumple it up like this, and then it has a lot of kind of hills and valleys, and you can lay the bacon on it, and it will drain and maintain its crispiness better than if you use paper towels. We will also need to have a cheese grater. Now, the cheese grater, that could be a box grater like this. I'm going to use a box grater because it has the larger holes. Some people like to use a microplane grater. I don't think that's really appropriate for this particular presentation. It makes the cheese too fine when it's been grated. You can also use a grater like this. Also, I think this makes it too fine. So we're going to use a box grater today. With this side, there's 4 sides on the box grater. We're going to use the one with the largest holes. We will also need some wax paper. Again, we've used wax paper before. We're going to use that with the butter to butter the cocottes. And we'll also need to have a saute pan. Saute pans they have a sloped sides to them, not square sides. This pan has been with me a long time. I don't even want to say how many years it's been. But it's been through the mill. You can see it's been used many times. But it's about 10 inches wide, good size for this presentation. And let's see, what else? We're also going to need a saucepan. The saucepan will be used for purposes of boiling the potatoes. And let's see, we'll also need to have a mixing bowl and spoon for mixing the mixture that's going to go into the Oysters Rock. And we will need cocottes. Now, let me break for just a moment, and I will bring the cocottes, and we're going to talk about those. Okay, so I'm back with the cocottes. Now, we've used the cocotte before. This is a 4-inch cast iron cocotte made by a company called Staub, S-T-A-U-B. And I love these things. They retain their heat really well. They have a lid which fits on there well. So it's kind of like a miniature Dutch oven. Now, these are very versatile, and you may have noticed from the fact that we've used them in a couple of preparations, and we'll probably use them again, that it's good to have them around. It's great for making a small plate because you can make a portion that's a good size for a single guest. And also, it makes a better presentation than making something in a large baking pan and then trying to divide it up when you serve it. It might look great when it comes out of the oven, but it does not look great when you try to divide it up and serve it. Now, you may not want to get cocottes. So alternatives are to have another type of oven-safe dish, something like this. It's like a 4-inch wide ceramic dish. They have to be oven-safe, though. Or ramekins. Ramekins are certainly oven-safe. These came from Pier 1. These are probably, we wouldn't want anything smaller for this preparation. In fact, these are probably slightly larger than we need, but they make a nice presentation. So if we put the presentation into this ramekin, it's going to be pretty filled up. If we put the presentation, the preparation today into this ramekin, it's going to be a bit lower down in the dish, but it looks good. So you can use any one of these things, but I prefer the cocottes. We're also going to need an underplate, like I've mentioned before. These need to be warm so that when you put the hot cocotte on it, it doesn't crack. Looks good to have the cast iron cocottes on top of these gratin dish underplates. But you could use the ramekin or some other type of an oven-proof dish as well. And as I mentioned before, I will sometimes put a bar napkin on here so that the presentation dish doesn't slide around on the underplate. We will also need to have just a regular soup spoon for spooning the mixture into the cocottes. And we'll need to have a timer. We have my lettuce timer here, and we also have a more professional looking timer as well. We'll probably use the lettuce timer today. Or you could use the timer on your smartphone. And finally, we will need to have a towel. The towel will be used when we shuck the oysters, and if you have an old ratty towel, that would be the towel to use, because after you've used it to shuck oysters, it will probably never be exactly the same again. So you'll need a towel as well. So that is all of our equipment. So we're going to break now and come back and start cooking. Okay, we're at the board. We're going to start this preparation. First thing we're going to do is preheat the oven to 400. I've already turned the oven on. Then we're going to peel our first potato. So probably everybody out there has already peeled a potato, and it's really a matter of personal taste. Some people like to peel toward them, some people like to peel away from them, some people like to go like this and do as many small little pieces as they can. Some people like to see if they can go all the way around the potato in one continuous peel. Now, of course, I can't do that because I've already peeled off parts of it. And some people use a combination of all of those techniques. And you want to try to remove the eyes if they are if they're deep and if they are kind of rooty. You can use the point of the peeler to do that. Take the eye out. There's only a couple on here that I think should come out. You know, if it's dark down in the eye, I usually take them off. If they're kind of more like blemishes, I will often just leave them there. Okay, we got all of our peels here. Now, what we're going to do is we want to make like a 1/4 inch to you know, somewhere between 1/4 and a 1/2 inch dice. So first we're going to cut the potato like this lengthwise, then we're going to cut it this way, and then we're going to cut it that way, then this way, and then this way, and we have the dice. Okay, each one of these is they're probably about a 1/2 inch dice. Okay. We'll do the whole potato that way. And of course, to make smaller dice, you just cut them. These didn't separate. We'll just show you an example to make a smaller dice. We'll do, instead of 1 cut here, we'll do 2 cuts. And then we will do 2 cuts on this side. And we wind up with something that's more like a 1/4 inch dice. For this preparation, it doesn't really matter so much if they're 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch. Since I did half of them as 1/4 inch, since I did the first half of them as 1/2 inch, I will do the second half of them as 1/4 inch. So we'll have kind of a mix of sizes. Okay. All right. So there are our potatoes. They've been peeled and diced. Now we're going to boil them. So I'm going to go off camera and come back with the saucepan. Okay, so I've gotten our saucepan. You might say, well, how big does the saucepan have to be? I tend to use more water rather than less water. for a couple of reasons. One is, the way I'm going to do these potatoes is I'm going to put them into this plunge strainer. You don't have to have one of these. You can just put them directly into the water, but you'll have to fish them out with a slotted spoon. And so I want to have enough water that when this plunge strainer goes down into there, it's going to cover the potatoes. The other reason is because the more water you have, the better it maintains its temperature. So now here we're going to be starting out with cold water. But if you were starting out with hot water, when you put any food into it, the temperature is going to drop immediately. The more water you have, the less it's going to drop. Now, we have our sauce, so we have a saucepan, and we are going to add some salt to it. And again, you want it to be tasting kind of like the ocean, okay? So it's like the ocean salt water. And we're going to start with cold water because with potatoes, you want to start with cold water. If you already bring the water to a boil, and then you put the diced potatoes in them, they're going to absorb more water, and they may get mushier. Start with cold water. They cook as the water is coming to a boil, and they may actually be done before the water gets to a boil. Now, the salt is not going to totally dissolve in this cold water, so you will probably want to stir it as it heats up. So we're going to now put that on the stove. And I put it on high heat to bring it up, and we're going to put this plunge strainer into the cold water. Now, it depends entirely upon how much water you have, how hot your stove is, how high you turn up the burner, how small or how large the dice is. That's going to determine how long it takes to cook these potatoes. We want them to be cooked just through, okay? So they want to maybe even slightly al dente, so they still have a little bit of a bite to them. We don't want them to be mushy. So we're going to let them go for, let's use our timer actually, so we don't forget. We use our lettuce timer. Let us do that. And we're going to set it for 10 minutes. We're going to check them in 10 minutes and see how they're doing. All right, so we have heated the salty water. We have preheated the oven. We have peeled and diced the potatoes. Now we are going to shuck the oysters. So I'm going to break, come back, and we'll shuck some oysters. Okay, next thing we're going to do is we're going to shuck some oysters. Now, I have here, for this preparation, according to the information that comes on the video, it calls for 24 oysters to serve 6 people, so it's 4 oysters per person in these cocottes. We're going to only shuck a couple of them on camera, and I'll do the rest off camera. Now, sometimes shucking an oyster is really easy, and sometimes it's really hard. This one has a nice little, so what you want to do is you want to have the flat part of the oyster up and the rounded part of the oyster down, okay? Put it on your towel. And then you want to put your towel over the top of it like this, and put this knife into the indentation where you'll see there's a rounded end to the oyster, and then it kind of comes to a point, and there's an area at the end here where there's usually like a little indentation. You want to put your oyster knife in there. That indentation is clear on this oyster. It is not always clear. Even when it's clear, sometimes they're not easy to open. So something, I've seen people do this who do it all the time. They can just do them at an amazing speed. But if you don't do them all the time, and I don't do them all the time, I'm not quite as fast as the professionals. So anyway, put your towel here, put this here. Now you do this partly to keep it steady, and partly so that if your knife slips, it's going to go into the towel like this and not into your hand, okay? So put the knife into the point, into the indentation, push it and twist it. And that one went right in there. That was good. Okay, good. It's always nice when I'm on camera that things go well like that. And then you use the oyster knife to separate the oyster from the shell, okay? And sometimes there'll be some debris. You use your oyster knife to get rid of that. Now we're going to be taking these out of the half shells, so we can worry about any debris later on. Also, by the way, since I'm trying to teach you technique, I went ahead and put the oysters on some ice cubes, and I did rinse them. Now, if you're going to rinse them, you want to do it right before you shuck them. Oysters are alive. You don't want to kill them with the chlorine that's in the water that you drink. Well, you might not. Nobody drinks it anymore. I guess they buy bottled water. So we're going to open another oyster, put that knife into the indentation, and the top of it came right off. And we want to separate the oyster from the shell using the knife. Okay. Next, we're going to do one that's harder, hopefully. I mean, it's not hard to find some that are harder. Okay, this one has a little bit of an indentation there, but it's less of an indentation, and so it may be harder to get the knife in there and get it to open. Let's see. Oh, nope. Well, no, see, part of the shell broke off, and when that happens, it sometimes is then even harder to get it to pop open. There we go. All right. So that one popped open as well. Okay, use the knife to separate the oyster from the shell. And we'll do one more, try to find one that looks like it might be harder to do. That one looks like it'd be easier. This one, oh, this one looks like it's going to be hard. Okay. So this one has almost no indentation here. So what we're going to have to do is try to make ourselves a little indentation right under the point there. So we'll put the towel back on top, push that knife down in there, and there. Okay, it released. Good. All right, so that went amazingly well, considering the fact that I'm on video. All right, and then separate it. Use your towel to wipe off your knife if necessary, and then separate that oyster from the shell. Good. Okay. Okay, now let me just clean up a little bit, and I'll be right back, and we'll continue with the prep list. Okay, so what I decided to do, since I'm gonna be shucking these in stages, is I went and got a larger bowl, put some ice in it. We're gonna put our mixing bowl on top of that, and then we're going to put our oysters into. Now I've noticed here in this particular oyster there is a little crab that the oyster was eating. We're not going to use that crab. We're going to get rid of the crab. So we're going to just knock him out of there, and we're going to take the oyster and put it into this bowl over the ice, so they stay cold. Okay. Now I'm not using all of the so-called liquid in here, which is called the liquor. I'm not using all of that because I don't want this preparation to get too wet. Okay, normally if I were eating these on the half shell, I would just eat that as well. All right, so I'm going to go back off camera, clean up a little bit, probably shuck the rest of these oysters, and we'll come back for the next step. Okay, we're back. We have checked our prep list. We've shucked the oysters. I did the remainder of them off camera, and actually there were two that were harder. The rest were pretty easy, and it took me about 5 minutes to do the rest of them. Now we're going to chop our shallots, and I keep my knives pretty sharp, but this is a sharpening steel, and I will usually every day when I'm about to start cooking, I'll run the knife along the sharpening steel a few times on either side. It's at an angle that's about like this, and underneath it's about the same. What that does is it raises a burr. It raises a microscopic bit of metal on the edge of the blade, which doesn't actually sharpen the blade. It just makes the cut better because the burrs help to do the cutting. To peel the shallot, we're going to press down on it and then cut off opposite the root end. This would be the sprout end, and then most of the peel will come off pretty easily. Now sometimes after you peel a shallot, you will see kind of a black I don't know what it is, whether it's a fungus or something, like here, you'll see some of this blackness. What I'm going to do is I'm going to rinse that off and dry it. Okay, it rinses off very easily. All right, let's get rid of our peels here so we can work clean. All right, now different people have different ways of cutting shallots. What I'm going to do is cut it across the middle, right through the root end. Then I'm going to do a couple of slices this way along the where you can see the ribs of the shallot, and then we're going to cut it this way. And remember, keep your fingers turned in under like this, thumb behind, so it's less likely that you'll cut yourself, and make a fine dice. We're going to do the whole shallot. Now we're only going to make 2 or 3 of the cocottes during the video. The information that comes with the video is for 6, to serve 6 people as a small plate. I'll try to cut up these other pieces here so we don't waste any of the shallot. And again, we're not measuring, so we're just going to make probably a little bit more than we need. And then we're going to eyeball it when we go to do the assembly. But basically, I had a shallot that was about a little bit smaller than this to do 3 cocottes worth of this preparation. So to do a total of 6 cocottes, which would be 24 oysters, would use maybe 2 shallots that are a little bit smaller than this. But again, we'll eyeball it when we get to it. So if you chop too much, you can use it for something else later on. So we'll put our shallots off to the side right now. Check our prep list. So we have chopped the shallots. Now we need to chop some parsley. And again, I'm going to keep chopping the parsley in front of you for the first few lessons, but soon I'm going to stop doing that because chopping parsley is really not very exciting, and you've already done it several times. Again, we just want to get rid of the large stem pieces, and use your chef's knife, which is curved. Put your hand over the end that's pointed, and then chop into whatever it is that you're chopping, and pivot across it, keeping this end pretty much in this one spot, and then chopping across it. Use the knife to bring everything back together again. Okay, that's a good chop. We just need a coarse chop for this preparation. In fact, with parsley, it's almost always a coarse chop. There's no real reason to make parsley into a really fine chop. Okay. Put that over to the side. Now what we're going to do is wash and dry the spinach. So here we have our spinach. This is 5 ounces of spinach, which should be plenty to do 3 cocottes. Now once we saute the spinach, you probably know this, but spinach just goes from having a whole lot to having hardly anything. It's amazing how it kind of disappears in the pan. 5 ounces should be enough to do this preparation. So we're going to pour it into the salad spinner, and then we're going to use the salad spinner, the spinner part itself, as a colander, and we're going to wash it under cold water. So I'm going to go off camera and do that, and I'll be back in just a moment. Okay, so I've washed the spinach. After you give it a good wash, shake it off in the sink to get as much of the water out as you can. I'm just doing that on camera over top of the spinner bowl just to show you. We just want to get out the extra, the water that comes out easily. And pour that out. And then take your salad spinner and put it on the top. This is a Cocotte salad spinner. Oxo also makes a good one. Let's push this back. And then just spin it. Get off that, get it pretty dry. Now it doesn't have to be perfectly dry, because actually having a little bit of moisture on the spinach when it goes into the saute pan helps to wilt it. Okay. All right, good. So nice and dry. It's got, you can see there's some moisture laying on the surface of the leaves. That's fine. It'll help with the wilting process. All right, so we'll set that aside for now. Check our prep list. So we have washed and dried the spinach. We need to, next thing on the list is to prep the Pernod. Now, you don't need much Pernod. We're using probably about 1 teaspoon, roughly 1 teaspoon per cocotte. You don't need a whole lot of it. I don't have a whole lot of it, but I don't need a whole lot of it. So when prepping something like this, to me it usually means just making sure that the lid comes off. There's nothing worse than being ready to use something, you need it right then and there, and you can't get the top off. So I will make sure the top comes off easily. So we have it standing by. And we've chopped the parsley. All right, now we need to grate our cheese. Okay, so push these things off to the side here. You can put these into prep bowls if you like and keep them until you need them. Cheese. Okay, here's our cheese grater, and here is our cheese. Now, you could grate it right down and have it fall onto the board, but I am going to grate it into a bowl so that we have it contained. We just take our hunk of cheese, take the box grater with the area with the largest holes, and run that hunk of cheese back and forth over those holes. This hunk is pretty hard. Had it for a while. So, again, how much do you need? Well, remember, we are taking a cocotte that's about this size, and we want to put a nice layer, I should say, of Parmesan cheese on top. So we have to look at how much we might need. Piece of cheese, hunk of it came off the side there. And you see how much we have in here. This is probably enough for one cocotte to cover the top of the preparation that's in one cocotte. So we're going to do about 3 times that much, because we're going to do 3 cocottes in this video. If you have some pieces, little pieces that break off, don't worry about it. They'll just add a little bit of extra savoriness, a little bit of maybe a little surprise. When you go to eat it, you'll get a little bit bigger bite of cheese. So that's probably just a little less than you need to cover the tops of 3 cocottes. So just grate a little bit more. It's always better to have too much than not enough. Always save it, use it for another preparation, put it on some pasta later, something like that. Okay, so that's enough that we can sprinkle over the tops of the preparation in 3 cocottes, right? So that's how you measure it. Figure out how much you need to do what you're trying to do. All right, next thing, we've grated the cheese. Now we need to butter the cocottes. So we're going to take our insalted butter and our wax paper, and we're going to take a little bit of that butter and put it on the wax paper. I say wax paper, it's actually waxed paper, W-A-X-E-D. And we're going to rub it all over the inside. Make sure you get down into the into the corners. Okay, right, that's one. There's no magic amount that you want to use. You just want to make sure you get a nice coating inside. One more. You start to run out, you know, the wax paper is getting a little bit dry. Well, I always go back to that first one because that first one got a pretty heavy coating. So we can get some of that out of there onto the wax paper and finish buttering that last cocotte. Make sure you get in the corners. Okay, so okay, we have buttered the cocottes, and next thing on the list is to prep the brown paper. Now, prepping the brown paper means to crumple it, which I did when I was showing you the mise en place at the beginning. We want to crumple it so when we do the bacon, it's got some hills and valleys. Okay, now we are going to take we're going to go now and check on the potatoes. Okay, so check the potatoes, and they still are holding their shape, and when you try to push a toothpick through them, they still have a little bit of resistance, so they're what I would call al dente. They still have a little bit of a bite to them, and so I'd say these are ready to go. So we're going to put these aside until we need them. I forgot to mention earlier that the timer went off when we were off camera, and they've been on for 10 minutes. We set the timer for 10 minutes, and I put them back on for another 5 minutes, and so it took about 15 minutes. But again, like I said, it depends on the size of the dice. It depends upon your heat, how much water you have, etc. Okay, so we have boiled the potatoes. We're now ready to do some cooking at the stove. So I will break, and I will meet you back at the stove. Okay, so we're at the stove. We have our saute pan. We're going to get this burner going. Always have trouble with this one. I'm going to put it on medium-high heat. We're going to be par cooking this bacon. So I usually start with the bacon in a cold pan. Some people start with the bacon in a hot pan. I don't have a strong opinion on whether one is better than the other. I usually start with a cold pan. All right, so we got most of it in there. I'm going to cook just this much. Remember, we're just doing 3 cocottes. This is more than we're going to need. But, you know, bacon can always be used for some other purpose. Everything's better with bacon. All right, so remember what we're doing in this step is we are going to par or partially cook the bacon. We do not want it to be hard and crispy. We want it to be a little bit undercooked, a little bit more rubbery. Now, in a prior lesson, we boiled the bacon before we used it. That's a Julia Child technique. I think that if you do that, it makes the bacon less salty. It also makes the bacon a little bit more rubbery when you cook it. You know, you don't have to do that. We did that in that preparation so you could see that particular technique. We could have done the same thing in this preparation. We could have boiled the bacon first, but we're not, so that you see the difference. In this preparation, we're not boiling the bacon, but we could have. You saw what the texture of the bacon was like after it was boiled in the prior lesson. In this lesson, it's going to be more like you usually see bacon. Bacon that you get in most places or that you make at home has rarely been boiled first. Unfortunately, I have to turn on the fan and provide a little bit more background noise. Now we're doing this in real time so you can see how long it takes. Another reason why I like cutting the bacon in half rather than putting in the long strips is, one, you can see it's easier to fit things in there and move them around. But I think they curl up less. I think they stay flatter if you cut the pieces in half and cook them that way. Now, why do we want this to be partially cooked? The reason is because it's going to cook more when it's in the cocotte. The other reason is that if we start out with something that's really crispy and hard, well, we don't really want that to be part of the end result in the cocotte. I think if it were crispy and hard, it would soften up through the cooking that it's going to get. But it would still be harder rather than softer, and we don't really want that as kind of a texture in the finished dish. Now, you could, if you choose to do it that way, you could do it that way. You could make it more crispy so that you get like a crunch when you take some of the bites of the finished dish. But I don't really want that crunch. But it's a matter to a great extent, it's a matter of personal taste. It's a matter of you deciding what you like. Okay, so I think that this is, see, it's starting to get browned and turned up on the edges a bit. That is good enough for me for this particular preparation. You're always going to have some hot spots in your pan, so I will move these pieces to around in the pan. Now we're going to put in these other two pieces that we have. Okay. Now we have the pieces have already been cooked on the brown paper, and I am turning them over a little bit, pressing them into the paper to try to get some of that grease off, some of that extra fat. These two are done. What was that I said about them not rolling up so much? These two are rolling up a whole lot more than the others did. But they also seem to be a little bit fattier too, so maybe that's part of the reason. All right, now after we finish cooking these, we're gonna leave a little bit of that bacon fat in the pan for purposes of wilting spinach, but not much of it. So we're gonna have a can that I keep nearby, and we're going to put some of that bacon grease into the can. This is hot stuff now, so I'm going to turn off the heat, bring the can over, and pour really all of the bacon grease into that can. And the only bacon grease that we're leaving in the pan, in the saute pan, is what is basically sticking to the pan, kind of a coating of bacon fat. Handle that hot bacon fat carefully. And just going to move this around on the paper a little bit, try to get some of that extra fat off of there. And I'm going to take this back over to the cutting board because we're going to cut this in a little bit. Okay, so next we're going to wilt the spinach. Turn our heat back on. Now this time I'm putting it only on medium, even closer to medium-low, because this is going to happen pretty quickly. The spinach is going to wilt very quickly. We want to try to cook it only until it starts to lose its leafiness, and well, it's still a green color that's closer to its raw color, and not a dark green color, which we'll get if we let it cook too long. All right, so we'll put it in the pan here. We'll put the pan on the stove, get the pan hot. Now it's already pretty hot because it had that bacon in there. Now we're going to put this spinach in the pan, and it's going to start to sizzle right away, because remember, it has some water, still water on the surface of the spinach. We want to get all of it into the pan, as much of it as we can out of this spinner. Then we want to give it some salt. How much salt? Well, you have to use your judgment. You just want to have a sprinkling so you can see that it's kind of covering the spinach. Same thing with the pepper. And meanwhile, the leaves that are down underneath, they are probably almost done. Just wilting is what we want. You can see that the volume is reducing as spinach does. Reduces very quickly. All right, good. Now what we're going to do is we're going to pour that into a bowl. Good. See that? See? So we have it's losing its leafiness, still pretty bright green color. We're going to just put that right into the bowl that we're going to be using to mix the rest of the preparation. All right, so you can see what that's like. And we've got some liquid in there. It's been rendered from cooking the spinach. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to break, and I'm going to meet you back at the board. Okay, we are back at the board. Let's check our prep list. We par-cooked the bacon. We sauteed the spinach in olive oil, salt, and pepper. And now we need to cut the bacon. So what we're going to do is take these pieces of bacon, and again, we have 3 cocottes. How much bacon do we need? Well, it's hard to have too much bacon, but we're going to use like a roughly 1 of these per cocotte. So we'll have some left over. Actually, I think so we'll just have a little bit more. I'm going to take 4 of these pieces among 3 cocottes. Okay, so again, so when you're judging, if you were to be laying the bacon on top of the of this preparation, you'd probably use about that much. We're going to be cutting it up and mixing it in with the preparation, so you might want a little bit more than we would have laying on the top. But again, it's a matter of preference. It's a matter of judgment. If you like a lot of bacon, use more bacon. Okay, so what we're going to do is cut these down the middle. And then we're going to cut them in pieces that are about 1/4 of an inch wide. Okay, that's our bacon. Next thing we need to do is, let's see, we've cut the bacon. We need to chop the spinach. So we've got a lot of liquid here in the bottom of this bowl. We don't want all that liquid. Spinach renders a lot of liquid when it's cooked. So what we want to do is, this is already pretty coarse, because when it reduces, when the leaves reduce, everything becomes kind of smaller. But we're just going to cut it up kind of coarsely like that. Okay. So that's the next thing on our list. Drain and chop the spinach. All right. Next, we're going to mix everything together. So I'm going to rinse out this bowl and be right back. Now, if you're paying close attention, you're probably saying to yourself, wait a minute, this guy has used a whole lot more bowls than he showed us during the equipment part of the presentation. Well, I have used a few more bowls. You can never have too many stainless steel bowls of various sizes. They really come in handy to make everything so much easier. You can avoid using the bowls sometimes, but it's just easier to use them. When we took that spinach out of the saute pan, when we stopped cooking it, we could have just left it in the pan, but it would have kept cooking that way. So by taking it out of the pan, we stop the cooking. So the camera clicked off again in the middle of my sentence. I think I figured out why. I used the word STOP, and when I say that, the GoPro does that. All right, so we're going to try to stop. So I used the word again, and the same thing happened. All right, so I'm going to try to avoid that. All right, so we're going to need the oysters. I've had the oysters in the refrigerator in a bowl on top of a bed of ice. And what we want to do is put the oysters and their liquor into this bowl. Now that's a lot of liquid, but we're not going to put all of that liquid into the cocottes. But we are going to start off with that much liquid because that liquid has a lot of flavor. That oyster liquor has a lot of flavor. Okay, now we want to mix the oysters, we want to mix the shallots. So we're going to take all of our shallots and put those into the bowl with the oysters. Okay, and we want to take our potatoes and put those into the bowl with the oysters. And then we want the spinach as well. Okay, so we've got all of the spinach in the bowl, and we want to get that bacon in there as well. Then we want to put in the parsley. Now, we have a lot more parsley. Let's wipe this board down a little bit. We have a whole lot more parsley than we probably need here. If we put all that in there, I think it's just going to be, more parsley than you want, right? So we're going to just sprinkle some over the top, and so we're going to use roughly about half of that much parsley. So we want it to be, we don't want the parsley to be overpowering in the dish. We want a nice balance among all of those ingredients. And then we're going to put in the Pernod. Now, as I said earlier, Pernod is pretty powerful. We don't want to use too much of it. So we want to use, we're going to use about roughly a teaspoon per each cocotte. And now that I've taken the lid off, I can really smell it. So what we're going to do is we're just going to pour in, we have 3 cocottes, we're going to pour in a little bit. 1, 2, 3. Now that's roughly maybe about a teaspoon apiece. But by doing it the way I just did it, we are taking into account how many of the cocottes we're preparing. Figured we'd use just a little bit in each one, so we're doing 3, so I poured in a little bit 3 times. Okay, so we've mixed the oysters, the shallots, the potatoes, the spinach, the bacon, the Pernod, and the parsley, and we're going to give a little bit of seasoning here, just a kind of a light seasoning with the salt and the pepper. And then we're going to gently, see, we got a little bit more potato in the bowl here. Get that in there. We're going to gently stir it around, mix it up. Why gently? I don't want to break up the oysters, and I don't want to crush the potatoes. But I want to have it all nicely mixed up. Now, because you can eat oysters raw, and because this bacon is cooked, it's okay to taste it now and see if it's properly seasoned. Now, I like to use my fingers, but my friend Penny, who also teaches cooking, she said I shouldn't use my fingers, so I'm reluctantly agreeing, at the moment at least, not to use my fingers for the tasting, but everybody uses their fingers. Let's face that, okay? At home you use your fingers. I think everybody uses their fingers, but I'm not going to do it in this video. Who knows whether I'll continue to do it as the course proceeds. Okay, so I can't really taste any salt. Again, you don't want it to be salty, but you want the salt to just start to poke through. A little bit more pepper. Mix it up again. Okay, let's taste it again. Get a little mixture of everything there, some liquid. Good. Saltiness just starting to poke through, and you can just taste that Pernod. You don't want the Pernod to stand out too much, You want there to just be kind of a hint of it. Okay, so we've got everything mixed. Now we're going to divide it into the cocottes. So, what I want to do is I want to get an equal number of oysters into each cocotte. We're figuring 4 oysters per cocotte. That's 3. That's 4. Okay, that's one of them. Now let's do the next one. We're going to get 1, 2, 3, 4 oysters. Let's do the last one. Now there were 12 oysters to start with, so there should be a total of 4 in here. Okay, good. So now we have 4 oysters in every one. Now you know, when you go to restaurants, sometimes you'll order something and you know it's supposed to have an ingredient and you get a little bit of the ingredient. I'm a real stickler for making sure you get what you're supposed to get, and also everybody gets the same amount. So that's why I do it this way. I count them out. All right, count them out to make sure everybody gets what they're supposed to get. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to spoon this mixture into these cocottes. And it looks like we have made the perfect amount. Got a nice mixture of spinach, potatoes, bacon, and parsley. Try to divide it equally among however many cocottes you have. Then once it's all in there, I like to go back and take a look at it and see if they look about equal. In other words, does one of them look more green than the other one? I think this one looks a little bit more greener than the others, and this one a little less. So I took a little bit of spinach from this one and I put it over here. This is the type of finished plating activity that the chefs in the highest end restaurants do. You might see in a high-end restaurant that the chef is standing somewhere near where the food leaves the kitchen, and he's checking every plate to make sure every one of them looks perfect, every one of them has what it's supposed to have, and that they all look the way they're supposed to look. Okay, so I have now made all of these look about the same. The cocottes are filled up about, oh, I'd say about 3/4 of the way with the preparation. Okay, so let's check our prep list before we go any farther. We mixed everything together, we divided it up into the cocottes, and all that's left now is to garnish it and to roast it in the oven. So, I put them into this baking pan so they're easier to handle. And we're going to put a layer of Parmesan cheese on top, nice generous layer. Not going to use all that we have, but you can see that we made more than enough, but we want to have a nice covering here. We want to basically have everything covered nicely. So we had maybe just, well, you know what? We don't have that much left. Let's just put it all on there. Can't hurt it. And then, just as to give a little color contrast, we're just going to put a little bit of the parsley on top of that grated Parmesan cheese. Okay, now we're going to roast these in the oven uncovered. Why are they going to be uncovered? They're going to be uncovered because we want this cheese to melt and get a nice golden color to it. Okay, so we're going to now put them into the oven, and we're going to check them after 10 minutes. A 400-degree oven, remember that. Now, why is it that we can't just put them in for a set amount of time and be done with it. Again, we're learning to cook like a pro here, so you have to be flexible. And depending on your oven, till you really get to know your oven, it may be hard to predict how long this will take. I think this will take about 15 minutes in this oven, but we're going to check them after 10 just to see how they're doing. Now remember, oysters can be eaten raw, so they don't have to be really cooked in this process. They will be cooked, but you don't have to worry about them coming out raw. The cheese is going to melt on top. The potatoes have already been cooked, and the other ingredients that are in there, the bacon was already cooked, the spinach was cooked, and so we don't really have to worry about anything in that cocotte being undercooked. It's really a matter of heating it up, making it nice and hot, making kind of a stew, and getting that cheese to melt on top. All right, so we're going to break now. We're going to come back when the timer goes off. Okay, here we are, ready to check out lesson 10. I'm going to check the prep list. We did the garnishing with the twist of pepper. We did the parsley and the cheese. We baked them in the oven for 10 minutes, and I just checked them, and I think they are perfect. Yep, they look perfect. So 10 minutes, 400 degrees. And I'm going to try to hold this up so you can see. It is a thing of beauty. Nice golden crust. And I have here our warmed underplate, and we are going to just sit the cocotte down in the middle of the underplate, and we're going to do just a little taste to see if we need to adjust our seasoning. And of course, I'm going to do that on the one that I would eat rather than one I'm going to serve to someone else. I think the seasoning's perfect. I don't think we need to add any salt or any pepper. So here we are at the conclusion of lesson 10, oysters and cocotte. To recap, we shucked some oysters. We chopped some shallots. We par-cooked the bacon. We peeled, diced, and boiled the potatoes. We grated the Parmesan cheese. We wilted the spinach. We seasoned everything, and then we baked it in this cocotte. So that is the conclusion of lesson 10. Please remember to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so.